Hello, how are you? My name is Aisha, and today I'd like to speak to you guys about redlining. Redlining is a discriminatory practice towards Black people that kept them out of nice white neighborhoods, if you will. The article that I'm going to be reading from is NPR. This article is from 2017. It is titled A Forgotten History of How the U.S. Government Segregated America. So this just wasn't random people working together to discriminate against us Blacks. This was the US government, as they've done so many more times before this. So here we go. In 1933, faced with a housing shortage, the federal government began a program explicitly designed to increase and segregate America's housing stock. Author Richard Rothstein says the housing programs begun under the New Deal were tantamount to a state-sponsored system of segregation. So here they go, segregating against you again. The government's efforts were primarily designed to provide housing to white, middle-class, lower middle-class families. So this was not for you, he says. African Americans and other people of color were left out of the new suburban communities and pushed instead into urban housing projects. Fun fact, I grew up in the projects in New York. Rothstein's new book, The Color of Law, examines the local, state, and federal housing policies that mandated segregation. He notes that the Federal Housing Administration, which was established in 1934, furthered the segregation efforts by refusing to insure mortgages in and near African American neighborhoods, a policy known as redlining. At the same time, the FHA was subsidizing builders who were mass producing entire subdivisions for whites, with the requirement that none of the homes were sold to African Americans. So, not that they weren't sold to Asians, not the Hispanics. They didn't want you in their neighborhoods. This is a practice specifically to the African American race. So when you think about it, when I was younger, I would think, why do we live over here and why do the whites live in nice neighborhoods? Well, now I get my answer all these years later. Knew something fishy was going on, just couldn't put my finger on it because I was so young. Rothstein says these decades old housing policies that had a lasting effect on African American society. The white Americans are chilling, having a good day, or having a good time to this day. We're the ones that are still living in housing projects and can't find houses in white neighborhoods. You'll find out some more nastiness of this history. The segregation of our metropolitan area today leads to stagnant inequality because families were much less able to upwardly mobile are much less able to be upwardly mobile when they're living in segregated neighborhoods where opportunity is absent, he says. If we want greater equality in this society, if we want a lowering of the hostility between police and young African American men, we need to take steps to desegregate. I personally think the whole desegregation thing is bullshit. I think that segregation probably is a must. I don't mean drop your white friends, drop your Black friends, drop anybody. I'm just saying, in order for a race to get their shit together, they kind of need to get together and work together, because you've seen ever since we've tried to desegregate, every single time we tried to get together, what happened? The whites had a problem with it. It wasn't the Blacks that were fucking up the whites. It wasn't the Blacks that were going into their neighborhoods burning their shit down. It was the whites coming over to say, you're not supposed to be here. Think about that. The Federal Housing Administration's justification was that if African Americans bought homes in these suburbs, or even if they bought homes near these suburbs, the property value of the homes that they were insuring, the white homes they were insuring would decline, and therefore their loans would be at risk. So good old discrimination. There was no basis for this claim on the part of the Federal Housing Administration. In fact, when African Americans tried to buy homes in all white neighborhoods or in mostly white neighborhoods, property values rose because African Americans were more willing to pay more for properties than whites were. So there goes what's happening when you try to desegregate, you try to live with these people or around these people, you end up having to pay more and you're upping their property value while they're giving you strange looks saying that you're not supposed to be there. See how it goes? Ridiculous. I kind of lost my spot. So the rationale that the Federal Housing Administration used was never based on any kind of study. It was never based on any reality. It was based on the reality of keeping Black people out of the white neighborhoods. That's what it was. On how federal agencies use redlining to segregate African Americans. The term redlining comes from the development by the New Deal, by the federal government, of maps of every metropolitan area in the country. And those maps were color-coded by first the Homeowners Loan Corp, and then the Federal Housing Administration, and then adopted by the Veterans Administration. And these color codes were designed to indicate where it was safe to insure mortgages. Wow. And anywhere where African Americans lived nearby, were colored red to indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky to insure mortgages. There goes your discrimination right in front of your face. If you don't know what discrimination is, there you have it. Legal discrimination. On the FHA manual that explicitly laid out segregationist policies. It was in something called the Underwriting Manual of the Federal Housing Administration, which said that incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. Can I read that to you one more time? In the Underwriting Manual of the Federal Housing Administration, which said incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, basically as whites, meaning that loans to African Americans could not be insured. In one development in Detroit, the FHA would not go ahead during World War II with this development unless the developer built a 6-foot-high wall, cement wall, separating his development from a nearby African American neighborhood to make sure that no African Americans could even walk into that neighborhood. This is your America. The Underwriting Manual of the Federal Housing Administration recommended that highways be a good way to separate African American from white neighborhoods. So this was not a matter of law, it was a matter of government regulation. But it also wasn't hidden, so it can't be claimed that this was some kind of de facto situation. Regulations that were written in law and published in the Underwriting Manual are as much as de jure, hopefully I said that right, unconstitutional expression of government policy as something written as law. So over the years, we keep being told that we're not being discriminated against, yet they're literally writing this into law that they can discriminate against us. And everyone's just saying, well, since I didn't know about it, then it didn't happen. On the long-term effects of African Americans being prohibited from buying homes in suburbs and building equity. Today, African American incomes on average are about 60% of average white incomes, but African American wealth is about 5% of white wealth. Most middle class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. Listen to that. The whites, most middle class, which can be anybody, but we'll say the whites in that time, they gain their wealth from the equity of their homes. Remember that. You gain your wealth from the equity of your home. This is why they all have property. This is why they keep you from having property. You can't be wealthy without having property and big thing. You have to own something in this country to be wealthy, to add to your wealth, to become wealthy, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that's the only way, but that's how they started. Okay? So this enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 5% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. African American families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 1940s and 50s and even into the 60s by the Federal Housing Administration gained none of the equity appreciation that whites gained. So, the Daly City development south of San Francisco or Levittown or any of the others in between across the country, those homes in the late 1940s and 50s sold for about twice national median income. They were affordable to working class families with an FHA or VA loan. African Americans were equally able to afford those homes as whites, but were prohibited from buying them. So African Americans could afford them, but they could not buy them. They were told they couldn't do it. Today, those homes sell for $300,000 or $400,000 at the minimum, 6-8 times national median income. So in 1968, we passed the Fair Housing Act that said, in effect, okay, African Americans, you're now free to buy homes in Daly City or Levittown. But it's an empty promise because those homes are no longer affordable to the families that could have afforded them when whites were buying them in those suburbs and gaining the equity and the wealth that followed from that. So every single time you got closer to the mark of winning, somebody would move it 150,000 feet. This is not your fault. This is an American problem. I will continue saying this. You have been discriminated against. You did nothing wrong to receive this crap. You did everything that you possibly could to assist in this country, to be a part of this country, and every single time you were told it wasn't good enough. Your skin was your sin. You don't deserve it because of who you are. And it wasn't everybody else that was being told this, because if you think about it, they've been mentioning African Americans the whole time. And every so often they mention people of color. But for the most part, this is for us. This is discrimination for African Americans, for the Black people in America. The white families sent their children to college with their home equities. They were able to take care of their parents in old age and not depend on their kids. So this is all the things that happens when you buy a home, when you have land, when you own things in this country. Then you don't have to work as hard. So the reason why we have to work hard is because we were always having things snatched from us. They would give it to everyone else and tell us that we had to wait. So you wonder why there's a wealth gap. You wonder why Black people are not living everywhere in every state and own hella land. It's not our fault. It's not because we're lazy. That's a bold-faced lie. A bold-faced lie. It's because every single time we moved forward and we did anything, someone held us back, basically. I'm going to leave you guys to read the rest of this. It's not much. I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to give you guys some information about redlining and how it really did hurt us. It didn't hurt that many people, it hurt us. So when people come into this country and say, African Americans, how is it that we're moving past you when we come in? Well, you're allowed to move past us. You're basically given the okay to move past us. Everyone else gets to come into this country, step on the African American or the people of color, quote unquote, and just move forward. And that was done by design. This was done to all of us on purpose. So I'm not saying don't keep trying, just give up. Because, people would love for us to do that. But I am saying you've always been treated like a second, third class citizen. You've never really gotten the things that you've needed because at every turn, someone was trying to discriminate against you. And this is what I'm trying to make you guys understand with my videos. Not all of this is our fault. We got a lot of shit that we need to take care of. But for the most part, we have been sabotaged at every turn. So this is some of the history of redlining. These are some maps. I thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.